Perfect. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is a special webinar. Well, it's not even 10 a.m. yet, so I try to start right at 10 to be respectful of everyone's time. This is a special webinar because, first of all, I invited my partner, Misha, to present. But the idea was that the three topics that we're going to cover today under the topic of new and dense new neighborhoods of future generations is the three topics that we hear from our clients when we are designing these neighborhoods. So we have three different segments, and I think they are really the foundation for designing and planning new neighborhoods. One is the design, which Misha will cover. The second is, okay, is it going to work? Which is a myth part. How do you plan from retail absorption? Placemaking is great. We as architects love all those beautiful renderings and showing a lot of people, but hey, what about market absorption? How do you plan for that? And last, we have Lior, who is not the first webinar we're doing together. And so thank you, Lior, for sticking with us. Lior is joining us from Rotterdam, the Netherlands. And Lior is going to talk about mobility and focus on how we design neighborhoods that are less car dependent. And if you focused or following me on LinkedIn, you see that this week, we had a lively discussion about Liberty Village, and people are saying, okay, the traffic here is, we can't have more people. But once we shift the focus on how we are less dependent on cars, we will be able to have a sustainable future for these new neighborhoods. So I think this roundtable today is going to be extremely valuable for everyone who's in this sphere. But I think it's a great one. So let's get started. Misha, you're going to be the first one.
Okay, thank you, Nama. Okay, I'll wait for my screen to pop up. So yeah, in the meanwhile. Hi everyone. Do you see it already? No, I don't see it. Yeah. Okay. So my name is Misha, as Nama said. I'm an architect and urban designer, and I'm Nama's partner at Smart Density. So I will be presenting an approach that we developed for new and high density neighborhoods. Oops. So you've seen the future. So we've been dealing with the challenges of new neighborhoods for a while now, and especially the challenges specific to high density neighborhoods. And we studied and identified some of the existing approaches that work relatively well. So that's what you see on the screen. And also, when we travel, we always go to see new innovative neighborhoods. And there are definitely a lot of interesting things to learn from them. But the thing is that when you compare them to the best older neighborhoods in the same city, they tend to be, or often are, quite disappointing. And some of it may be because they did not have enough time to mature, or the architecture maybe is not good enough. And these are significant factors sometimes, but when you look up close, it's not really about that. And we put a lot of effort to try to understand what is missing in these places. And what we got to is that they failed to achieve these two qualities of vibrancy and charm. And vibrancy is at least something you hear about, so we understand it's something we need. It's often missing. We often still fail to achieve it, but at least something we have some understanding of. And charm is something is practically not even on the radar. And I want to challenge you to even think of a neighborhood from the last couple of decades that is achieving both of these. And we think that there are two reasons why we can't really get these qualities anymore. One is scale, and the other is too much car access. So about scale, it's just that everything we build is too big, and I'm talking especially about kind of the public space. So streets are too wide, open spaces are too big, and generally we just have too much of it to be usable. And obviously, it's okay to have some larger spaces, but when everything is big and open, it really works against the possibility of vibrancy, even if there are many people, because there's no concentration. And at the same time, it's very hard to achieve charm without having any intimate spaces that can work for it. And so the other issue is too much car access. So obviously, we need to provide access for cars, at the very least for commercial service emergency vehicles. But in many places, we will also have people who own cars. It's just that many new neighborhoods, even when they are walkable and have transit access, they make car infrastructure very dominant. And the thing is that even when you do have good bones, like in these images here, when you have too much car access, it can really destroy the potential of the place. So the infrastructure that just takes too much space, you're always exposed to noise. There is particulate pollution. You always have to pay attention not to get run over, at least when you're crossing. So we developed an approach that to address these issues that we identify, and it's based on combining components of low and high-rise neighborhoods. So as we were looking at these things, we were always kept coming back to these low-rise, medium-density neighborhoods, both older ones, but also, for example, post-war neighborhoods in places like Korea and Japan that do have this scale and character. So the thing is that these neighborhoods manage to create a vibrant and charming urban environment. So they have this small and quiet street, they have short blocks, a lot of variety. They're fun to explore, and often where there is where you want activity, they can be very active. And they do have two issues, which is part of why we don't use them that much anymore. One is that they are quite limited at density, and those that are of high density, usually it's the expense of living space, so they typically would have small units and very little open space, public and private. And the other is that if in cases when they do need to allow a lot of car traffic, it can really destroy the streets very fast, like in some of the images we've seen. So the other place we looked at is high-rise neighborhoods and specifically point towers. And the big advantage that they have is that you can get even very high density if you need it, and still have a lot of separation between the buildings. Everything is very airy, and you can provide units with great views, daylight, so they really solve these issues. And the other interesting feature is that they have very low coverage. Like in a place like this, it might be as low as 10%, even less. So we can pretty much take them as they are and implant them in a low-rise neighborhood. Maybe not as simple as that, but in concept to get the advantages of both. And this is pretty much what we've done here. So this is a view of our project in Seoul that we'll go into shortly. So what we get here is that the dominant experience is that of this small human scale. And at the same time, most of the floor area here, it's about 75%, is in high-rise buildings. So obviously you see these high-rise buildings. It's not that they're not hidden. It's part of the experience, but they don't define the scale and the character of this neighborhood. And the other thing is that because most of the density is in these high-rise buildings, it provides opportunities that we can't have in neighborhoods that are just low-rise. So one is that because they have much higher population, they can support a lot of services and a lot of commercial activities. They're very vibrant, have staff nearby. The other is that they can be much more generous with open space, and that's both for public and private. So let's look at the project itself. I won't be going too much into details about the site because I want to focus on the implementation of this approach. But basically, it's central in Seoul. It's part of a larger development, so this is actually just phase one. It has 2 metro stations nearby, but it's also surrounded by freeways from about 2.5 sides. So some issues, some issues with connectivity. So what's on the site now, you can see it in the background, is this kind of low density, but also low quality development, also post-war. And this type of neighborhoods are the quickest to get redeveloped in Korea in general, pretty on a very massive scale. So I'll cover the major elements of the design and kind of the conceptual sequence. So first we locate the major routes, and so these are pedestrian routes. It's not about car routes, and they are the ones we start with them. They're the most important ones, and they're the ones also connected to the most important places. So in this case, it's the metro stations to the neighborhood, the future development to the east. And these streets in this case are pedestrian only because we are able to achieve it. I'll explain why later, and because we want to prioritize that. We also identify major open spaces here. So in this project, we have two types of streets for these major routes. One is more commercial. It is narrow, so you're close to shops on both sides of the street, and also because it's narrow, it can feel active even if it's not, if it doesn't have that many people. So it has this kind of character. And the other type has more of a green character, so it's wider, more open, defined more by trees. In this project, it also accommodates bike lanes. It can, like all places here, it can also have a commercial activity, but that's not the defining factor. And this is this very different character, but in both cases, they really enjoy from not having cars all over. I mean, these images are more for a reference, but in our case, they don't have cars. So in the next step, we locate the vehicular streets. So in this case, these are regular streets that have separate roadway and sidewalks. So the thing is that they need to get you close enough to any point in the neighborhood, but it doesn't mean that you need to be able to get with the car to each and every point, and definitely not at full speed. So in this case, it's more of a loop because of the site conditions, but typically it would be more of a grid that is parallel to the grid of pedestrian streets. So you see, these streets can still, of course, be very nice, but it's just that we wouldn't make streets with car the main spines of this place. Then next step, we start considering preliminary locations for high-rise buildings. So we consider separation, limiting overlook, and how we, for example, here we also avoid certain locations like right south of the park for kind of shadow consideration. In the next step, we introduce more local streets and small open spaces. You can also see like an early concept diagram showing pretty much the same type of character. And you can also see that we can get pretty small blocks. And the reason for that is that because we have mostly narrow streets, we can just have more of them. So that's what allows it. And from these types of streets, so this is more the typical residential street. So in this project, we could work with very narrow streets, so they are pedestrian only. But for example, in our projects that implement this approach in the Toronto area, the streets are wider, so we do in most of them they are shared, so we do allow some car access. You can also see in the background a small square, and the reason these kind of spaces can even work here is that the streets that lead into them are narrow, because if this space was next to a street that is 20-25 meters wide, it would practically disappear. And there are some places where we do need to provide the vehicle access. So we just use the shared street design where you drive at walking speed. And but it's not an issue because you only go like 50 or 100 meters, so it can work. And this diagram shows the space allocation on the streets. So you can see in pink that the pedestrian network is dominant. You can also see in purple the dedicated bike infrastructure that is fully separate from cars, so it's a big advantage. And the other kind of interesting thing is that you only need to cross a road once in, at least on the major pedestrian routes, once in a few hundred meters. So they don't have much impact on your the walking experience. And again, the reason all of this is possible is because we have a small block, so we can have parallel networks of vehicular and even pedestrian-only traffic. And then we go more into a build form, and here I just want you to be able to see the general character and also note the differences in the footprint between the low-rise and the towers, and but still the towers carry here like about 75% of the floor area. So this is a figure ground comparison of that shows the footprints of buildings. So it shows it to the left in our project and to the right in different types of urban fabric that are common. And so you can really see the relationship and similarity of the character and the scale to this kind of low-rise high footprint neighborhoods. And this is an overall plan that just shows more of this element together, so you can get more of an idea, not in diagrammatic form. So this will be the last slide, and showing like a 3D view. And what I want you to take away from this is how we can use this combination of low and high-res elements to create a very rich public realm. So we can have these human-scaled streets and open spaces, small, short blocks. We still can provide car access, but we don't need to make it dominant. And fundamentally, the idea is that we are able to get the framework to have charm and vibrancy again in new neighborhoods that we build. Thank you, and I will pass it to Amit. Yeah.
Perfect. Hopefully everybody can see that. First and foremost, thanks for having me here today. My name is Amit, and I lead the planning and placemaking team here at Colliers within the Greater Toronto Area, but we work across all of North America on large master planned communities that are mixed use and try to create something a little bit different. So before I get into our example, which is located in the suburbs of Vancouver, I wanted to quickly walk you through how we view placemaking, as it'll give a bit of context towards our approach for this case study. Ultimately, at the end of the day, our team really wants to guide the creation of inclusive, equitable, diverse, and sustainable communities. That's our purpose, and that's what really gets us up in the morning. But we think the current view of placemaking is slightly flawed. Now, when you talk to somebody, placemaking has become one of those buzzwords that everybody tends to use. You ask 10 people for their definition of placemaking, and somehow you get 11 different answers. But from our perspective, really, placemaking is the set of upfront, coordinated diligence activities that need to be completed for large-scale development sites if you want them to be successful and sustainable in the long run. Now, when we talk to clients, they always seem to prioritize things like site activation, engineering, the public realm, and urban design. Now, obviously, we know that these aspects are extremely important, but we do think that this approach is understanding the complexity of putting together a 100-acre site that's going to be multi-phased over a 20 to 30-year timeline. Like Nama said, from our perspective, we think it's challenging and bad business to try to create these places solely based on pretty pictures and gut feel. Really, maybe put it another way, we think that the regularly accepted view of placemaking is discounting the science involved in the process. And that's what we're trying to bring to the table, really using data and analytics to improve the decision-making process when we are developing these large-scale sites. Maybe put in other terms, our hypothesis is really that too many groups jump right from concept to vision to execution without properly validating their project. And that can be a problem from our end because it results in proposals and visions that are inconsistent with market reality. At the end of the day, we want these places to be successful in the long term, but we believe for that to occur, they need to be rooted within market realities because they're not going to survive otherwise. In some instances, they might not even get developed to begin with. Now, of course, we're not suggesting that you can just create a place using a spreadsheet full of market metrics, but we do think that you can use data and analytics to guide your thinking in terms of what a place could potentially become. So let's get to our project. This is Lansdowne Center in Richmond, British Columbia. For those of you who don't know Lansdowne, it's a 600,000 square foot shopping center in Richmond, BC, which is a suburb of Vancouver. It's actually where the airport is located. It's currently anchored by a T&T supermarket, a Winners, a Best Buy, and features about 130 retailers on site. So the mall has been performing decently, but the owners of the site, they're a progressive group. They're really big picture thinkers. They realize that Lansdowne's an underutilized site and it could be so much more than it is currently. Again, just for context, we're talking about a 50-acre site that's located in the heart of Richmond on Number 3 Road. It's adjacent to Kwantlen Polytechnic University. And I should mention there's also a Canada Line SkyTrain station right on site, which means that you can be in downtown Vancouver directly in 25 minutes. So obviously, again, because they're progressive and big thinking, they saw the need that this could be something transformational, but they didn't understand that there were several questions that needed to be answered before really diving in. Things like what types of uses were viable on the site and how much of each use should they build? Was it really going to be as easy as just trying to build to max density as outlined by planning policy, throwing up some condos and slapping some paint on the shopping center? Or was there something more aspirational that could be done here? They also wanted to understand how the product could properly be positioned in the marketplace. As many of you likely know, Vancouver is an extremely competitive market, and the pandemic only made things more challenging on the office, retail, and resi side of things. So how could they create something that was consistent with where the market was heading, but still was unique and special? And the last point, which Nama kind of alluded to earlier, was phasing. We're talking about a 50-acre site, and while you could certainly try to take the entire thing down and develop it at once, that doesn't really make much sense in our minds, right? So we knew that this was likely going to be a multi-phase project, but the question was, when and what should they prioritize initially to build a buzz for the site, but still be aligned with market realities in terms of what this could be? So really thinking about a process or answer in terms of how we were answering this was kind of based upon what you see on the screen right now. At a very high level, phase one was focused on trying to understand what demographic, economic, and market parameters were going to influence development now, but more importantly in the future. We then moved into phase two, which was testing those parameters against the market to ensure that the assumptions were realistic and appropriate. And we put the two of those things together to create a placemaking strategy. Honestly, I could talk about everything we learned here for days on end, but I only have a few minutes left. So I'm going to highlight a couple of things that I thought were kind of interesting to show how this process really can be informative when thinking about large-scale master plan development. So one of the biggest questions we were trying to answer through this process was if there was a market for office space as part of this overall build-out. As many of you would know, hybrid work has become a really hot topic since the pandemic. We're about 18 months removed from the initial return to office, but there's still quite a bit of uncertainty in the market regarding the future of office. There's a recent study done by Colliers, not the plug, but it found that about 60% of companies have finalized their plan for return to office, which is largely hybrid focused. Now, again, that seems like a good proportion, but that still means that 40% haven't come up with a meaningful occupancy strategy at this point. And that presents a little bit of a challenge when you're trying to plan for a complete community over a long-term development horizon. So when we started analyzing the competitive environment, it became really clear to us that utilizing a traditional office program wasn't going to really work here because this was not a place that the traditional office user viewed as attractive, just given the competitive supply that was being developed in other desirable locations within Metro Van, places like Burnaby, Surrey, and the Fraser Valley. But our economic research did find that there was this cluster of aviation organizations and supporting industries that were located within close proximity due to the airport and the university's presence. And these sectors were likely to grow moving forward. When we spoke to market brokers, we learned that a lot of these organizations were located within suburban business parks within Richmond, but they had been looking for nicer, mixed-use, amenity-rich, more of an urban feel type of environment. So one of the recommendations was to really monitor the growth of this sector, start building relationships, as there could be an opportunity to work with them to drive office demand in the future when the commercial was starting to be built out. On the retail side of things, we knew that the center again was doing okay, but one of the biggest factors was going to be the presence of the CF Richmond Center, which is a super regional center that's located at the next SkyTrain station. For those of you who are familiar, it was kind of like one of those predominant CF malls, and realistically, Lansdowne wasn't going to compete with Richmond Center for tenants. We knew that something different and unique would have to be proposed on site if this was going to work. So our first step was really to understand who was going to be moving to the area in the future. So my colleagues always laugh at me because I tend to use like tired old sports cliches, but I think there's one that actually applies in this instance. You don't pass it to where the player is today, right? You lead them and pass it to where they're going to be. Same kind of concept here. We really wanted to understand who's going to be living in Richmond moving forward. What do they want in terms of retail and how do they spend their money? So our research found that millennials and Gen Z are set to become the largest population cohort in Richmond within the short term. And looking further ahead, these residents are going to age into their prime consumption years, 30 to 54. And that's going to result in about 50,000 new residents in Richmond within this age bracket expected over the next few decades. We also know that this demographic tends to spend more on restaurants and experiential retail than other generations have previously. So whatever was going to be proposed in Lansdowne really needed to align with that. So we started looking for examples internationally of creative experiential retail formats that were successful within mixed-use master plan communities. And this best practice review was really done because we wanted to come up with ideas that were different than CF Richmond Center and would position Lansdowne as something unique and different in destinational within the marketplace. Again, as I mentioned earlier, CF Richmond Center is a traditional super regional shopping center. But when we started looking at Richmond, we found there wasn't really a place for people to gather, bring their families and spend the day. So we wanted to really tap into that void and see if we could find an interesting solution for the client from that perspective. Unfortunately, I can't really say what's going to be developed right now just because it's early days and it's some of these concepts are confidential, but I'd just say stay tuned in terms of what this could potentially be. And just really quickly to summarize, the outcome of this study was really a placemaking strategy that the owners could utilize to understand how much, what type, and when stuff should be built on the site, given long-term market realities. I know I didn't talk about phasing too much, but I'm happy to answer any questions in the Q&A or connect after the webinar. But really what we did was provide a 25-year phasing plan to ensure that Lansdowne is going to be able to build a proper buzz initially, and that'll lead to hopefully higher financial, strategic, and community outcomes in later phases. And the last thing I just kind of want to say, just to give you a concept of scale in terms of how we think about this, the eventual build out of the site is meant to be between 7 to 8 phases, 750,000 square feet of commercial and just under 4 million square feet of resi across 8,000 units. So that's why we wanted to apply some thinking towards this large scale site. That is the end of my presentation, and I will pass it along to Lior to conclude.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. I'm going to share my screen. I hope you can see it in full screen. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So my name is Lior Steinberg. I'm an urban planner, and I'm the co-founder of Humankind, which is a Rotterdam-based agency for urban change. I'm based here in rainy Rotterdam, and for this presentation, I cycled around the city to get some examples of how Rotterdam is building taller and taller, and yet trying to keep the old classical Dutch way of street design. And in a way, this graph explains it all. Rotterdam and the Netherlands in general has to go higher and higher, not in the scale of the last two presentations we saw, but many times we see buildings of 10, 16, 20 floors. And while doing it, you need to think about how the street is designed, how the mobility is designed, because you want to keep Dutch cities very walkable and very cyclable. And therefore, I wanted to maybe start with old streets, show you how typical Dutch streets are designed, and slowly progress through the higher and higher developments. So I'm starting here in a typical neighborhood in Delft, It's a small city next to Rotterdam, and it's the home to the best technical university probably in Europe. And what you see here is a lot of those small streets with one or two floor houses. This is how a lot of Dutch people live, these lovely old Dutch streets, very narrow. Many times the space is shared. You see your neighbors when you go out of the door. I mean, it's those kind of very cozy streets, especially in the summer when some trees are growing. And this is where a lot of Dutch people love to live. I just saw when I walked there this sign here to buy. I went and checked, and it's a 66 square meter house for almost 400,000 euros. So this is a very attractive place for Dutch people to live. And you can also see that the cars are still there on the street, but the streets are designed in a way that doesn't allow cars to go very fast. So you see that there are those deviations on the street, and the idea is that cars are allowed there and they can also park there. They are welcome there, but they are guests, and people can just walk in the middle of the street. And sometimes streets are becoming also car-free. So in all those neighborhoods, you always have those 1 or 2 car-free streets where you see more sense of community. So the less car is dominant in those streets, the more sense of community, more greenery you see, and of course in the summer is much more lovely. But of course, we cannot build the entire country like that because we are becoming denser and denser. More people are moving to cities, and we need to build a little bit up. And therefore, the Netherlands is starting to build a little bit higher. I will open this development here. I hope you can see the Google Earth. And what you can see here, there are a lot of developments, but you will see those quiet, they don't look very Dutch developments, where you have almost like a complex of few buildings together, built by one developer, and they still try to keep this idea of streets that are not for cars. So let's see how it looks in those kind of developments. As you can see, there is still constructions on the site, but that's how a lot of cities now look here, or neighborhoods look here in the Netherlands, a lot of construction. And you can see also that the the facades outside of the developments are normally involving some sort of shops, cafes, or other services. And if you turn into the development, you see a car-free street or a square. And this is something you see quite a lot. You see those, I would say, still rather dull, but yet better than living above a road. Square that is public. You can just go through, at least publicly accessible. And there are all those open shops there that now look a little bit dark because it's winter, so everything is inside. And those shops can also, of course, have terraces, etc. But that's how a lot of new developments are being built, trying to keep this car-free or car-light feeling, and yet going a little bit up. If you will go a little bit outside of the development, so outside of the block, you normally tend to see this kind of like half floor. And this is always a sign that there is something hidden there. So I always like to look inside, and you see, of course, that the cars are parked there under. So it means that there also needs to be some entrance to this parking garage, which is always in the back of the development, far away from like the main road in many cases. And they tried to keep it rather subtle and narrow, but you can still see that it hurts the feeling of I would say a lively street with an interesting facade. So that's when you build 3-4 buildings, but we need to build more, and that's where we go to the next project in Rotterdam, the Little Sea, which is, I believe, 16 buildings in different heights, some of them 15 or 16 floors. And this is where again, they wanted to keep this lively streets, but also really needed to go up. So Here they use different techniques to do it. First of all, you have all those cafes again, and small squares that are already a little bit more open around the development. You have the access streets where you can actually enter with a car, but there is no parking, it's just for a delivery. And most of the streets or allies in the development are car-free completely. They try to have a lot of greenery around them. You can see how people, these are all apartments on the right side, and those are offices in front. You can see how the apartments can start slowly take over those car-free, just like those old streets that I showed you before. People take out their things outside and really kind of have a fuzzy transition between the public space and the private space. And I'm here standing on a public space. I mean, yeah, it's still winter here in the Netherlands, so it's not very green, but in the summer it's becoming quite nice. I have some pictures from the summer. You have really successful cafes, good mixed use, and a lot of greenery, which you saw also previously in the other Dutch streets, in the old Dutch streets, people really like. So they try to bring it back to those buildings. And I will now move to the last project in the last 2 minutes that I have here. This one is in Utrecht, and we are going more than a block. We're going to few urban blocks, almost a full neighborhood in Utrecht. It's an area that is quite close to the train station. And this is how it looks now. It's empty. And this is the idea in the future. All full districts that they call car-free. How can a car-free district look like in the Netherlands? A lot of houses in different buildings in different heights, kind of reminding the project that Misha presented before. We see a lot of diversity in types of houses. And also, again, 2 types of streets. This main street in the center, which is almost like a square where people can just go out and meet each other. And then you have like the access streets in the back that are mostly green, but people can walk and meet. And you see, of course, a lot of news about this district: 12,000 residents, 6,000 households, and car-free. But it is important to say that this is not car-free whatsoever. There are a lot of parking space in the development. So first of all, there are 250 shared cars in this development. There are a lot of bicycle parking, but there is also remote parking, which is just at the edges of the development with not a lot of parking, only 1,500, which means 0.3 parking per household. And yet it's not car-free because you can still park your car there. But when they say car-free, they actually mean that you cannot enter with a car, with your private car inside the development, and everything is pedestrianized or for bicycles. So I return here to the last graph, and this is the last slide, just to show that the buildings and the streets are changing. They're going upper, but you have all those elements that still stay also when we are going to 16 or 20 floors. But you also see that the car, while in the old Dutch street is really in front of your house, the car is being pushed more and more outside of your building. So when we are building a higher, we have much more people, it's much more dense. It means that we cannot spend any space from the public space on car parking. And that's why the car is pushed either underground, which is very expensive, or outside of the district, outside of the area. So people can park outside and actually walk and cycle inside. So yeah, that's my presentation.
Wonderful. And we have some questions. Let me return the view to gallery view. And one thing that I forgot to mention at the beginning to the audience is that what is unique about our roundtables is that the idea is that the projects we're presenting are not in Toronto. So we can kind of import the best ideas from abroad, and we have a lot of the time international speakers. This is a coincidence that we have 2 Toronto-based, but both the project was one in Vancouver and one in Seoul. So thank you very much for the presentations. There are a few questions. I have a few questions myself. Misha, what we hear a lot is kind of an anti-tall buildings, right? Like people's like, can you walk us through some of the advantages that you see specifically for tall buildings? How can we change public perception?
So I think there are two aspects to that. One is about the public realm, and one is about the buildings themselves. So I think in relation to the public realm, the thing is that we also I like a lot of what's both older and some newer mid-rise developments in Europe. Some of them even they might not achieve the same densities that are sometimes required in East Asia or some parts of Toronto, but regardless, they are good in many cases. But they don't. They also suffer from the same scale issue that I mentioned, and so if you go to even older cities in Paris in Europe. You might think of maybe Paris has that the kind of has places of small scale, but then you have 6-story buildings very close to each other, so the living conditions is not great. So the reason we even went for this combination is that if the tall buildings carry all the density, we can have also combine it with low rise, and what it allows is having this much narrower and compact spaces at the ground. I think that the other thing is the buildings themselves. There is it's just very hard to I wouldn't say very hard, but it's harder to develop to design a tall building that would look good compared to mid-rise building, that just because unless you have the very high budgets of some projects, you have a lot of just a repetition of horizontal parts. So I think in many places in the world, it hasn't been figured out yet. It's also something we've been working on. But I think there are good examples for that. It's just that I think there should be more pressure to address these things specifically about design.
Yeah, and I have my own answer, but there's so many questions. I'll get going with those. Amit, I think the question about schools was actually referred to all three panels, but I want you to answer the question of schools. How do we, plan for schools? How do we consider them? Because I know it's, take for example, City Place. There was no demand for school. Now it's at way over capacity. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an extremely important element that I think there's a notion that as these developments get put together, there's always a priority given towards, well, just build higher, build taller, and throw retail and commercial into the mix. We need those community supporting elements to be included within these developments. I lived right at King and Spadina in downtown Toronto. Folks know that area. It's extremely dense. And you start to see the transformation in the area, and planning for those kind of amenities such as schools, community centers. When you're looking at large scale development in an urban format, it needs to occur. And so what we've always recommended is that when we work with our clients on the private sector side and on the public sector side, that needs to be part of the equation, that needs to be on the table. Obviously timing it towards population growth and understanding how demographics are going to change when you're looking at a 15, 20, 30-year timeline is important. Generally speaking, we found that the best solution is if you do have the public and private sector coming together to work collaboratively to make that actually occur, as opposed to being combative about it. But it certainly needs to be part of the equation. If we are expecting folks to move into more downtown urban areas, those community centers, schools, libraries, they need to be part of the equation. So,
and which leads me to a next question of what I'm taking from this, Amit, is the idea of transition. And Lior, and I'm going to combine a few questions that we're getting here into one, if that's okay with you, Lior. I feel like here in Toronto and in North America, I just came back from Austin. How do you deal with urban settings that are going through a transformation of becoming more urban? It's still very car dependent. there is investment in transit, but in North America, it's not an investment in a full network of transit as it is in Europe. So it is piece by piece, and it is very challenging to talk to the public about, hey, how are we creating a less car dependent future? What Lior, how do you see it from your perspective? And you're muted. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so there is, in some definitions, if you look at the Netherlands, the entire Netherlands is urban. It's so dense. There is hardly non-urban areas. Of course, there are more rural and more village-like, but so it's very difficult to just copy paste what's working in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, you many times very close to a train station. So no matter where you develop, you will be able to cycle to a train station which is well connected. But as you've seen in this presentation, and I always make sure to show it so nobody will think that Dutch people are special. Dutch people also love their cars. Their cars is always there. You always see it. That's why I took this picture of the garage. The car ownership in the Netherlands is not lower. The usage of the car is lower. But the car ownership in the Netherlands, it's a rich country and people are buying cars. They love their cars and they want to go with their cars in the weekend to places that are not accessible with public transit. So it just shows that you can still build those areas with car facilities, but you can start creating those main streets, like Misha showed, the main streets that will be car free, and some areas that will be car free or car light. And of course, while building it, you need to provide alternatives. So nobody will jump from car-oriented development to car-free development in one day. But if you will provide the bike lanes, good access to public transportation, it can take. It's not a revolution, but an evolution.
I'm reading the questions as we speak. There are a lot of questions, and we won't be able to get to all of them. I just want to cover about all the technical questions, and especially I get those about snow removals and emergency access and loading. All of the technical solutions exist. The fact that we're speaking about car free or car light doesn't mean that we exclude. First of all, like Lior said, it's not about necessarily excluding cars altogether, but especially for the technical aspects of emergency snow removals, this street could accommodate, they're wide enough for all of this technical. So I just didn't want to cover because I see a few of these. Misha, any thoughts on towers in the park in contemporary lenses? So maybe I'll give a very brief overview. Tower in a park is a post-war concept that we see all over the world, of basically a tower in a big green field that is over time became more tower in a parking lot. Misha, what is the evolution of towers that you see in relation to the tower in the park concept?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I also saw like some other details they were asking about. I think so. It's definitely something we had in mind. The part of it is that in the immediate post-war era and for many decades, practically all the places that implemented that concept have done it very badly. So especially in North America and big parts of Europe, it was practically more, it was just a huge amount of surface parking and kind of poorly developed landscaping, in part because the densities often weren't even that high to support more. And also in some parts of Europe, you have, when you don't have cars, it's kind of just, there's just too much open space, so you can't do much with it. In East Asia, I would say like especially in Korea, China, a little bit in Japan, there is trend of actually developing I wouldn't call it actual towers in a park still, but it is towers in a well-developed landscaped area because they are at very high density. There is also the incomes are very high now, so they put like massive amount, like just massive underground garages and build a lot of landscaping on top of it. But I mean, it's much nicer than before, but it still doesn't really solve these issues of scale and like just having like urban environment. I mean, it has its place, but it's not really working. And I think one of the questions here was about the interaction with the low-rise building. So I think first of all, this whole story of shadow impact, it's highly overrated, especially in context of towers, because in slim towers, not like your massive slab towers, but slim towers, point towers, the shadows move very fast. The other thing is that I mean, this is the type of density that definitely won't be anywhere. So if someone, there is like most of our cities will never have these densities of, I don't know, 50,000 people per kilometer. Even so, most of it is not like that. So there will always be an opportunity to be farther and don't have that impact. But this is something here, in a way, the low rise is more to serve, to create the environment than just to provide you like a house with a backyard.
Yes, exactly. And there are a few questions actually about what is the pushback in the Netherlands? Lior, we suffer from quite a NIMBY culture here. And I know that you do community engagement internationally. Any piece of advice, or maybe you can tell us maybe how NIMBY looks in the Netherlands, but I would say this is definitely a character here.
Yeah, look, I'm becoming impatient for NIMBYism by people who are against building more houses. I mean, we need more houses. Sorry, I mean, I think also that a lot of politicians they just need to have more courage. At the end of the day, we need to build more houses, and it's not going to work if we're just going to build more and more suburbs. So that's my solution for this NIMBYism. But you do see NIMBYism, which is quite similar to a lot of the stories I hear from you and about Toronto, is that people don't want to live high-rise in many cases. They're used to this low-rise, more cozy. And of course, in Canada, it's a different type of low-rise, but people are used to it and they love it. And it does take effort to convince people to actually agree to such a way of living in tall buildings. And also, it's important to remember that in the Netherlands, you're not allowed to build in the city centers because they are old and they are protected. So there are also these kind of I wouldn't say NIMBYism, but regulations that don't allow you to build too high in the city centers, where we actually want to build high. Yeah.
Which and that would be my last question. I'm merging because again we have 18 questions, so this will be my last question. Amit, the question is for you. I'm merging two questions. Because Lior, a big part of it, and there's a big discussion, is like the feasibility. Construction is very expensive. Of course, it means that building housing here is very expensive, and taller buildings are. I mean, they are equivalent in construction costs to mid-rise, but I'm talking about this type of construction. Amit, the question I'm referring to the two last questions. Okay, well, we got more sense then, but there are two questions there about how. Try to answer both in the same one, but like, how do you convince a developer to hire and I can just say, as maybe I will answer that instead of Amit, because I'm doing your business development now, but we're working on 115-acre new neighborhood, and we plan for the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 40 years, and a big part of it is like, hey, how retail is going to work here. And it's great that we are, as architects and urban designers, have this plan that we think is going to work. And yes, we want to make sure that there's one place and everything is concentrated there. But at the end of the day, we really need the market analysis to support us. So here's how you convince a developer. But feasibility challenges you faced, and I'm reading the question, you faced and also foresee with typical floor design, shifting away from the long-established car-oriented to higher density downtown real estate. What are your ideas on how the challenge can be tackled?
Yeah, so when we and you kind of alluded to it, Nama, when we work with private sector clients, a lot of our work it's on the economic and the demographic research I mentioned, but what we'll do is put that into a development pro forma to understand what kind of feasibility returns are realistic, right? And every client has their own investment parameters and targets that they're trying to hit. And I mean, this is hopefully not news to anybody, but development feasibility is not rocket science in terms of revenues, costing, and a profit margin. And so there's only so many levers you can kind of pull and push on right now. And unfortunately, the development community is being squeezed on both sides of the equation. And so when you think about atypical 4 designs, I think one of the things that we talk about these large master plan communities in urban areas is how do we get more larger 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom units included within the unit mix, as opposed to just studios and 1-beds, and get more families living downtown. And that impacts the pro forma. There's only there's a limited amount that you can kind of do on the revenue side of it. And so when thinking about what kind of solutions might need to be proposed, obviously construction costs are what they are, but just finding ways for the development community to be the most efficient on the costing side, getting development approvals done quicker. I'm not saying that every single tower needs to be a 90-story tower, but thinking about smart density, not to plug your business there, Misha and Nama, but thinking about the way that can be improved, because at the end of the day, like, just candidly, developers are going to have their return thresholds that they need to hit. But I do believe that there are groups out there that, in addition to that, are thinking about the social good and understand that we are within a significant housing crisis right now. They are looking for solutions that need to be implemented. Not everybody is agnostic towards that. And so looking for ways to help them make those numbers work, I think that's the solution. And really, at the end of the day, that to me is about a conversation and finding policy that can really facilitate development in a smart manner. So
absolutely. And what I'm hearing more and more, and that we think that Toronto is, we're the only ones suffer from housing shortage and housing affordability. And every maybe Tokyo, doesn't suffer from it because they had oversupply 30 years ago. But everyone else, everywhere I go, Madrid, Lior from Rotterdam, people are saying what worked for our parents is very clearly not working for us anymore. And we have this, as a result of policy and as a result of 40 years of shortage, we're now where we are. And just imagine what these places or our world is going to look like in 25 years if we are not going to change things. So I would like to thank the three of you and for the, 130 people who watched us this morning. Have an afternoon to you, Lior. Have a wonderful